Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and the narrative, as well as personal response and discussion of each of those chapters, talking about how they connect to the rest of the series. As usual, we will begin with a reading of the current chapter that we are on, which is Chapter 54, The Nameless Boy. A Shuhaku show? Who are you? What unit are you with? And where do you get that ridiculously oversized Senpakto? What? It's big? I just thought it was big compared to Rukia's. Up to now, I had nothing to compare it to. Amazing. The size of that thing. A Zanpakuto is proportionate to the wielder's spirit energy. Could his power be that great? It can't be. Stop staring. It's rude. Ichigo, you fool. Why did you come? I see. Now I know who you are. You're the human who stole Rukia's powers. What are you gonna do about it? Kill you! Ichigo Kurosaki. Bleach, Chapter 54, The Nameless Boy. Who is that guy? He turned Ichigo into a Soul Reaper, and he put me in Ichigo's body so his family wouldn't get suspicious. Then he disappeared? What's he up to? I have no idea. But that guy's creepy. I was dying to go look for Rukia too, wasn't I? Why am I talking to a bag of stuffing? Gross! Yeah! Fight! Fight! Well, is that huge sword just for show, huh? You talk too much. You'll bite your tongue. Man, who is he? He's fast. Yeah! It's over. You're as good as dead. That power will go back to Rukia. And Rukia will go to the Soul Society and die. Man, you're as dumb as they come. She ran away to protect you. If only you'd stayed home. But you had to chase after her. Do you actually think you could save her? Phony like you couldn't put one scratch on a real Soul Reaper. Oops, my bad. I know you were in the middle of a pompous boast, but your guard was down and I just couldn't resist. You were saying? Please, continue. Something about one scratch? That does it. Your guard was down, Rinji. Kujiki. So what, sir? For him, this may be a big deal, but... That child, Ichigo Kurosaki. I thought I'd seen him somewhere. There was an image-only report from the secret mobile force 33 hours ago. Minos Grande was driven back to Hueco Mundo by a sword wound. So it said. Minos what? Oh, you mean that giant with the big nose? Yeah, right. The secret mobile force isn't what it used to be. This one wounded Minos? This one? I can't believe it. Rinji. Look, Captain. Look at his Zenpakuto. It's just a big, impotent embarrassment. He obviously can't control his spirit energy. Hey, you! What's your Zenpakuto's name? Huh? Name? It doesn't have a name. You named your Zanpakuto? I knew it. You can't even ask your Zanpakuto its name. You think you can fight me as an equal? You're 2,000 years too early. The Zanpakuto. How, Zabimaru? Look, there stands dinner. It's over, boy. You lost to Renji Abarai. You'll die here. And that is it for chapter 54 of the Bleach manga. I believe that was 54, right? And I gotta go all the way back to the title page. I'll let you know. Yes, it was 54. Nameless Boy. It's easy to forget some of these times. Anyway, yeah, that's the chapter. Quite a lot happens in this one, so we have a lot to cover. I actually just finished recording this entire episode, and then it all went down the trash because my recording program decided that it wasn't going to save this one for whatever reason. I've had issues like that in the past where I found out that it didn't record the audio until afterwards, stuff like that. Not a lot of fun, but it happens. It's the nature of the beast. So we open, and luckily we get to see Uryu is not dead, just kind of incapacitated. We get that confirmation of the Shu Hakusho, which is the Soul Reaper uniform. Now I've been referencing them before, talking about the uniform, and I've talked about the kind of the physicality of things in Bleach as well. And this is, oh boy, quite a chapter for paying attention to how important the actual physical things are in Bleach and the way things appear, right? So the Shu Hakusho being a Soul Reaper uniform is kind of interesting, right? Because if you think about it, and like with a typical uniform, it's something that you have that you put on, and that makes sense. But the Shu Hakusho seems really tied intrinsically to a Soul Reaper's powers. Um, so if you think of Soul Reaper as like it's not like a race. It's like you're just a spirit that becomes a Soul Reaper. However, you have to go through training, right? There's an academy, so on and so forth. But there is some sort of power that is associated with the Soul Reaper, right? Ichigo took Ruki's Soul Reaper powers. And whenever he did that, he also took her Shu Hakusho. If you notice, obviously she's wearing one whenever she first arrives, and whenever her powers are transferred to Ichigo, she's just in kind of generic white robes, and Ichigo is now in the Shu Hakusho. And that's been pretty consistent every time that he enters his Soul Reaper form. We see Ichigo in that Shu Hakusho. Shihakusho. Whew. So it's kind of interesting to think about because it's like, okay, well, it's clearly tied to their powers, but is it like just whenever you get Soul Reaper powers, you just happen to have like a Japanese sort of styled robes? I don't know. There's clearly, it's interesting how it links up, but also it is a thing that kind of binds all these Soul Reapers design wise, which is neat. And it gets called out as such. And so that being the uniform of Shu Hakusho, that being the thing that really like can help you tell if someone's for sure a Soul Reaper, that throws Renji off a little bit, right? As he's trying to figure out what unit that Ichigo's in, right? And I like there's a lot of things about this panel that I think are fantastic. Here's our power lines as always, but especially for like a place that Renji escaped to as Ichigo kind of came in. He could have just jumped back, but the fact that he jumped to some place with high ground is particularly telling, especially if you consider the fact that, of course, his weapon, Zabimaru, can extend and have a longer range, right? So this is a really advantageous position for Renji to take. And, if he doesn't know what Ichigo's powers are, it makes sense to put distance between them. And I like that we get, Renji legitimately afraid here. Also, with this close-up, you can see, like, his eyebrows aren't completely painted on. That even though he's got tattoos over where his eyebrows go, his eyebrows still seem to be actually there, which is a neat touch, that it's not all just inked. But of course, he is completely thrown by Ichigo's giant sword, and I do love, it's made particularly thick here, and Ichigo is looking a little clueless, frustrated, but I like that we also get confirmation. No one's really pointed out that Ichigo's sword is ridiculous for a Shinigami until now. I mean, Rukia had that internal moment where she said that she'd never seen anyone Senpakuto get that large, but of course, she never told that to Ichigo clearly. This quickly becomes a sword measuring contest between Ichigo and Renji, as he's like, oh, I had nothing to compare it to, but now he has Renji to compare it to, right? And whenever I talk a lot about like Renji being a parallel to Ichigo, it's a character that we can very clearly see as somebody who might be in a lot of the same positions as Ichigo, were Ichigo to be reared or raised in Soul Society. Um, so it's kind of interesting that, of course, the first character that the other first Shinigami that he really has to compare himself up towards, he doesn't really have Rukia to really do that with, because of the fact that she hasn't had her power since he's gotten his. So it being Renji that's the first Shinigami that Ichigo is really doing battle with and has to compare himself to is interesting, because, like I said, Renji works as a pretty good parallel for Ichigo in a lot of different ways. And the ways that he is different helps to make him an effective foil for Ichigo too. I like that he says, "Yeah, I have nothing to compare it to," and then immediately we get the shot of Renji with his sword, forward to like really sell that kind of difference in their weapons. And so Renji immediately is thrown, because he's like, okay, well, he's got to have this great spirit energy, right? Really, really immense, huge amount of Reiatsu. His spiritual energy must be massive. But then Renji starts to piece it together, and of course Ichigo can't really control that power. I love that we get this, we haven't had Rukia really call Ichigo a fool in a while, and here she is kind of putting on that sort of, I don't know. I'm not going to say it's necessarily masking, but it is. But like, she's kind of falling back into insulting him and calling him a fool, and kind of using that to maybe make distance between them. I like that Renji quickly catches on to this too. That he really soon realizes, oh, okay, well, now I know, you're the human, and you're stupid for having gotten involved whenever she was trying to save you, or protect you. Which I like that too, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Um, Again, great, characters facing off against each other. Renji launching from on high. And yeah, by Yakuo, of course, we finally get a reminder that he is here in the back, and he's been more astute than Renji has. Nameless Boy, this chapter title name basically clearly refers to Ichigo not knowing the name of his weapon, right? But also, I think it's also kind of referential to Ichigo himself being this boy that they kind of don't know, that's not even on their radar. I like that his shirt says optimism. Nice! And it's got, 54 on it, because this is chapter 54. Cut back to Kon, and I really like the way in which Ichigo's body is drawn. I guess his hair being more down really helps to sell him as maybe being a little softer, a little less rough around the edges, but also his expression really sells him as Kon. He hardly ever has the same brow that Ichigo normally has whenever Kon's in his body. But we get reiteration of Kisuke being this kind of schemer. What's he up to? It's neat that, of course, Kisuke insisted upon Ichigo, or at least Ichigo's body being at home, so the family wouldn't get suspicious. But I mean, it's 2 a.m., right? None of them should even be awake. So I think the idea is more just to split Kon and Ichigo up. Probably because Kisuke doesn't expect this battle to go in Ichigo's favor. I don't know. But it's like, again, we don't know if Kisuke is powerful enough to kind of step in and stop Renji and Byakuya, or like what his situation is. We know that he was aware of the fact of them arriving, but the way that he's decided to get involved is to send Ichigo against them and make sure that Kon isn't there either. So in a way, Ichigo's body still gets to stay safe, but his actual soul is the one that's in peril. and Kisuke is very intentionally putting him in that peril. So that's another thing to consider is, of course, how Kisuke is kind of maneuvering all of this the entire time and how he decides to get involved, right? But here Kone's really just kind of reiterating some of the things that have been maybe more subtly present throughout, like the suspicions of Kisuke, him wanting to go at Haruki is kind of sweet. I like that he throws himself across the room in frustration and then goes and picks himself up. I think that's a fantastic sequence. Um, moments from Kone that I didn't remember, but I think are cute. Anyway, we cut back and, Renji's really giving Ichigo the business. He's taken on to the offensive as he's realized that Ichigo really doesn't have manner of controlling his power, right? Yeah. I like, this is, I talked about this before, but, another moment that the artwork really works in the manga that's something that you can't super well convey in the anime is just the motion of this, like, moment where Renji is jumped and kind of is spinning in the air, and like just this line work and the way that all the lines kind of like splay away from the same central, you know, area. The way that the shading is done is fantastic. I mean, it's obviously a bit messy, intentionally so, here and there. But there are moments like, it doesn't really need to break the line of the Shihaku show here. I do like it being two tone. I think that's kind of cool. Really kind of sells the highlights on his body as he delivers this pretty monumentous attack. But I like that Ichigo comes with his trademark kind of down slash, but that's not going to be quick enough to catch Renji, right? We really get the sense of Renji being the much more skilled combatant, both in aggression and in evasion. That one wound, the one strike being enough to send Ichigo to his knees is also pretty serious. I like Renji kind of standing over him and gloating, going back to his usual kind of hand on the hip, shoulder slung blade kind of pose. And it makes sense that Renji, for Ichigo to have that pose makes sense because Ichigo has a huge sword. But it makes sense for Renji to kind of have that pose, not just to mirror Ichigo's and to kind of drive home that parallel between them, but also because, as we know, with the way that when Renji's weapon transforms, he's going to swing it overhead and kind of brace it against his shoulders like that anyway. So it's cool that he does that even whenever his sword isn't transformed. Yeah, I like that he's like, okay, well, she's gonna get her powers back, then she's gonna go back to Soul Society and die. And we really get this like kind of look of Rukia being reticent, a little like, uh, maybe upset over the fact that this is how things are coming to pass. And Renji insults Ichigo's intelligence. So this idea of like Shinigami really looking down on humans as like ignorant or stupid, foolish, emotional, like we start to get a lot more of a picture of the way that Shinigami maybe think of humans on the regular, and tend to think of themselves as perhaps being a little bit more, refined in the know, uh, all of that, right? Um, yeah, it's an interesting thing here where like Renji's really kind of, in a lot of ways, he's talking shit. He's projecting, right? He's saying all this stuff about, do you really think that you could save her? You wouldn't be able to put a scratch on a real Soul Reaper. Um, if like obviously the idea is that like Ichigo is not a real Soul Reaper, right? That he's just kind of been masquerading as one, but that he wouldn't actually have any real ability to save Rukia. I love that Ichigo immediately just cuts him across the face, right? Puts that scratch on him. It's a really cool moment. It really, I think, one of my favorite things about Ichigo is that he doesn't take any like guff from these people. Is whenever they start to like monologue and get really full of themselves, which I mean that's typical. You usually get the villain that is all monologuing in any of these series, and it's fun to see the hero take them down and like kind of knock them off of their high horse or whatever it is. But Ichigo does it so quickly and in the moment. And I love that even though Ichigo's like facing this uphill battle against Renji, and not to even mention Byakuya, who hasn't even drawn his sword yet, Ichigo is still willing to be like this brazen and this forward with his attacks. Like he's like kind of rolling up his sleeves, like he's just getting ready, right? Um, I also love him being cheeky. It's a really great moment for Ichigo. I think it really helps to sell him as a character. Of course, he only was able to make that little scratch, so there is that. Um, but I really love this moment that comes up here. But before I get to it, I do want to talk about, again, more of that sort of parallel Ichigo and Renji, both of them with this smile here, and really even the way that their brow is not like knitted to, uh, you know, very much highlights a lot of the similarities between these characters. They generally have a similar disposition and a similar like kind of love for the fight and aggression to them. Although, we haven't seen as much of that in Ichigo, we certainly get a little bit of it here, right? I like that Byakuya insists, yeah, look, Renji, your guard was down, right? And it's because Byakuya at this point has realized the fact that, of course, Ichigo is a lot more powerful than maybe Renji's giving him credit. Um, so I like that Renji tries to be a little bit more like serious in this moment as he's being reprimanded, but Byakuya, of course, reminds him of the report from the secret mobile force. So we have like a secret mobile force, which is a weird translation, maybe like some sort of group of spies, whatever it is. Um, Renji did mention units, right? And certainly, if you start to think about the structure that Soul Society must have, then definitely there must be, we've already gotten the idea that different Soul Reapers are designated to different cities, and like even different districts in those cities, to really look over them. And so the different units in Soul Society must have, kind of maybe help to delegate that sort of work. But we don't really have that much confirmation from it. We know that there's a research and development division. We know that there's the secret mobile force. We know that there is a royal guard, and we know that there are different units. But that's about the most that we've gotten. I think the only other kind of bit of information about that sort of hierarchy is that we've also gotten, clearly there are captains, which Byakuya is a captain, and then there is at least 13 squads because we've been told that Rukia is a member of the 13th division, right? She's the first person in the 13th unit, whatever that is. Byakuya drawn a little awkwardly here. Eyes not quite, um, you know, what am I saying here? On the same level, right? Like this right eye much higher than the left, looking a little weird by there. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess I understand. Like, the planes of the face don't quite line for me here on him. Um, I guess the idea is that maybe it makes a little bit more sense if this eye is further set back. I don't know. It reads weird for me. I wish maybe that was a little better, but I love this, shading on Renji to really sell this moment as pretty extreme as he comes to understand that Ichigo has driven back Aminus Grande. And we get this reference to Hueco Mundo. I believe that's the first time that Hueco Mundo has been mentioned by name. So whenever Ruki talked about the different spirit realms, right, she mentioned that there was the realm of Soul Society, where all the Shinigami are at, and then there's the human realm, right, the realm of the living. And there's this place in between that hollows exist, and they kind of they're while they're there, they're completely unperceivable, and then whenever they come into the human realm, that's whenever they can start to track them and see where they are, right? And so now that place in between, we finally have a name for it that is Hueco Mundo. And I really like that, whenever we start to talk about these different realms and start to use a different terminology, it's really cool that Kubo has kind of kept consistent name theming. So with you know, everything with the Soul Reapers, it tends to be very Japanese themed. You have Zanpakuto, Shuhakusho, they have Reiatsu, they use, Kido, magic, so on and so forth, right? Their weapons are, Japanese named as well, like Zabimaru. But then we consider, the hollows, and I mean, I told you before the Cero is, of course, the energy blast that the Minos Grande used, but Hueco Mundo, which is, the world of Hueco, right? Mundo is world. I'm trying to remember what Hueco is, if it's hollow or if it's nothing. Um, that is one that I'll have to get back to you on because I don't remember off of the top of my head. Regardless, yeah, it's interesting that the idea is, of course, that the Minos came from Hueco Mundo and was returned to it. That's cool. I like that. We finally get kind of that confirmation. I like that also comes from um, from Byakuya. So yeah, it's I've looked it up. It's literally whole, um, right, or hollow. So it's the hollow world or the whole world. I assume, yeah, hollow world makes sense. Hueco Mundo. Anyway, I was right initially. Haha. So, yeah, but I like that it comes from Byakuya because he's like clearly informed and here even more informed than Renji, right? He knows about the report. He knows about the stuff. He's telling Renji this for the first time, assumably. And I like that Ichigo, of course, is like, wait, what? Like, he doesn't realize how important what happened was. Again, Rukia being surprised that Ichigo is able to drive back this very serious threat of an enemy on his own. Renji is like, okay, thrown for a loop. I mean, he starts to laugh, and I think he kind of goes into denial at first, right? Says, the secret mobile force must not be what it used to be. I can't believe that this one actually went like Winter Minos. You just look at his Zenpakto. It's just an impotent, embarrassment. He obviously can't control his spirit energy, and so I like that Renji kind of has this reaction because I think the idea is that he quickly connects, like, okay, if Ichigo is able to fight back a Minos Grande, right, then he must have maybe used his actual, like, sword transformation. And maybe he's just, like, taking it easy on me. I think that's the kind of thought process that Renji must be going through right now. I think that, of course, Byakuya is sort of like Renji. Like, shut up. As Renji starts to kind of insist and be in this moment of denial. I think that we get this clear clash between the two in that way, that Byakuya is taking this a bit more seriously than Renji is. And I love that Renji kind of comes to this conclusion, maybe Ichigo is not actually showing off his full power. Maybe he's been just fighting me casually, even, right? And so, of course, it makes sense that he would then ask, his Senpakuto's name, because we're being revealed that is how Shinigami use their power. And I think that's really cool. I'll talk a little bit more on this. I like that Ichigo's initial reaction is like, what, you named your Zenpakuto? Like, you weirdo? I think that's fantastic stuff. But again, Renji realizes, okay, yeah, clearly Ichigo doesn't know how to use his power. He doesn't have this control over it. And so I think this page is great one as he awakens his Zenpakuto, or he releases it. He basically transforms it, right? And I love the physicality of this motion. He draws his hand over the blade. We get these lines that are kind of thrown down as his hand sweeps across, and it turns into this jagged, like, fanged weapon. And again, it really, really kind of, I was talking about Renji as being this kind of predator, as being like this kind of wild dog or this beast. And I think his sword is perfectly fitting for that personality, right? That it's got these teeth that his command for it is howl Zabimaru, right? That he calls that out as he uses his sword, and he says, "There is dinner," of course, right? Um, yeah, I think that's fantastic stuff. It really sells again that everything that I've been talking about, the physicality of the weapons, but also it does another thing that we have gotten in Bleach so far, but maybe haven't really realized is that significant. Again, whenever I talk about power systems in manga, and I talk about Bleach having a power system that I think is pretty consistent and sets up for really interesting fights, I think this is part of it, right? The idea of evoking the name of a thing, of having these releases for their weapons, all of that, and so whenever we come back to the names of things, names are clearly important, as well as these kind of this evocation, right? He has to say "Howl, Zabimaru." Of course, it transforms before that, but nevertheless, he calls out to his sword. He knows its name, right? And similarly, that's been the case with the other powers that we've seen, right? With Shunshin Rika, or Himi's ability, right? She has to call out to the different fairies and then say the name of the attack that she wants to do. With Chad, we get the chapter title being Right Arm of the Giant, but it doesn't have like an actual, big name for it. I think that might be a little bit of an oversight, but nevertheless, he still has that moment where he's like kind of reaching out to that power and actualizes it. But we've seen with Rukia with her magic, right? She has to say a binding spell, and call out for that spell. And so a lot of the powers that we've seen so far have been named powers in which a character has really like kind of invoked them in a way, right? Called out to them, and then they've been made manifest. And I think that's kind of a consistent rule throughout Bleach. Whenever you have something to transform in this way, or take like physical form, be it shooting a fireball out of thin air, or transforming your sword into like this awakened or transformed states, then there seems to be always this association with some sort of evocation and even a name. I think that's cool. It's really neat, and it didn't need to be there, and it's pretty consistent throughout. And the fact that Ichigo doesn't even know this, and he's being made aware of it, it gives us a lot of places for Ichigo to grow. I mean, we were talking about that previous chapter, right? The idea that Ichigo, or the previous arc, that Ichigo can't control his power, right? If he could learn to control all this energy that he has, then he might be a threat. But here he doesn't know that control, where Renji clearly does, even if Renji doesn't have as much spiritual power. Him having that control is what allows him to get the heads up. I love that, like, he leaps up into the air to attack Ichigo, and Ichigo, raises his sword to defend, expecting that, he's going to come crashing down, not knowing that the sword's power now is that it can extend out in the way that it does. And I love the way that it looks here. So I had to check to make sure that it was consistently drawn, but it is 7 different kind of blades, and they're connected with this. Like, I love the little like spine in between them. It's fantastic stuff, and like this kind of sinewy kind of fiber. But obviously, Ichigo can't get his sword up and protect in time because he wasn't expecting this sort of ranged attack, this chain sword to dig into him, and it's pretty visceral, right? And the other thing that I love about this too is as Renji drags this from him, he has to kind of whip his sword back to bring it back into like being all gathered together, right? And if you're paying attention earlier in the fight in the previous chapter, Renji did these kind of really over the head kind of sword slashes throughout. It's because that's probably the way that he's used to fighting, right? Of using Zabimaru in this way, where he has to sling it overhead, and so that seems co-opted into his regular kind of fighting style. That he's less about stabs or kind of across the body slicing or anything like that, and more about kind of slinging this chain sword of a weapon. But I love the way that it's drawn here, the kind of momentum of it. It's pretty cool. Um, really, really strong kind of moment for Renji. And of course, the reiteration that this is the place that Ichigo will die, and we're left with that, which is a pretty severe kind of moment. Our in between, we have Kisuke, and we're left to wonder maybe what he is up to. Why isn't he getting involved? If Ichigo is getting absolutely bodied, we'll find out. Maybe so. But that's it for this chapter. I think, overall, pretty strong chapter for me. I love the reveal of this, power structure, right? That with control over your power, you can learn the name of your sword, and you can even ask its name, which is kind of wild. So like it implies like a sentience that Ichigo hadn't realized about his sword, and you have to really wonder, why didn't Rukia tell him any of this stuff? Because clearly Rukia must know all this information, and I wonder if it's that she expected to, return to society earlier, if she was just kind of being negligent of the truth. As we've known, Rukia has only told Ichigo as much as he needs to know, and it seems like that has continued to be the case. So kind of rough stuff that he wasn't aware of all of this, but it is more exciting in a narrative to kind of find that out during this fight anyway. So makes sense. Um, but of course, yeah, Renji I think is on fantastic display here. Lots of really great expressions from him. Really cool reveal of his powers and of his sword. I think Zabimaru's got a fantastic design in its revealed kind of state as it's released, and it becomes befanged and jagged as he is, uh, and it's like this kind of very very clearly like this offensive sort of weapon to really eviscerate an enemy with, and it's all lethal, and I don't know, that kind of that sells to me a little bit of Renji's personality, that he very much is this kind of person that is going to be very brutal against his enemies, that he doesn't show them any sort of quarter. Um, yeah, and we get a lot of really cool moments from both Ichigo and Renji as they kind of go back and forth in this fight. It's good stuff. Otherwise, yeah, I think the art in this one's fantastic. Some of the most kind of top notch stuff we've gotten. We haven't really seen any fights between humans, really, or like two humanoid enemies. We've mostly had people fighting hollows in Bleach so far. So it's cool that we finally actually get to see panel for panel a fight between two kind of more human enemies. Obviously, it's Soul Reaper on Soul Reaper battle. But Ishida got dealt with kind of off screen, and we haven't really had any other fights. We've had Ichigo, I guess, kick people in the face, but no like serious battles like this one. And this has been, one of the most serious kind of fights that we've had so far, even if it's only been kind of in this one chapter. Still, good stuff. I am a fan. I think, like I said, I think the things that I like the most is how this develops this, system of power, how we get a lot of world building stuff, but it's like kind of really, really subtly handled. Obviously these characters that have this information are speaking about things in a way that like makes sense for them, right? So like, of course it makes sense for like Renji to just like say kind of casually like, oh yeah, Hakusho, like what unit are you from? All of that. Uh I love Renji's expression on this panel, especially as he's kind of freaking out over the size of Ichigo's Zanpakuto. I think that's really great stuff, especially considering like, oh man, if you release that, if you actually have control over that, like, what's going on with this guy, right? So it's all kind of cool, all kind of impressive, and it leaves us in a place where we haven't really been before. Where most of the time, whenever we've seen Ichigo kind of seriously injured, it's after he's at least seriously injured his opponent too, right? Like whenever he managed to make Grand Fisher run away, or whenever he managed to make the Minos Grande run away. And so we've had this series of Ichigo kind of barely pulling through by the skin of his teeth kind of moments where he's like kind of collapsed after a very hard fought battle where he hasn't been able to defeat his enemy completely, or well, kill his enemy, I guess, but he's managed to make them flee. And here it seems like he's just not cutting it, and Renji and definitely Byakuya are both, standing and in, barely ever injured. Like Renji's got a cut on his chin, you know. So leaves us, wondering where this is going to go, and I think that's really cool. The juxtaposition to the previous battles that Ichigo has had really kind of sells this in a lot of ways too. Anyway, that's it for this chapter. I'm going to get into spoilers now, talk about how this connects to the rest of the Bleach manga. If there's anything that you noticed, both in the art of the narrative that you'd like to talk about, anything that I didn't mention, feel free to let me know in the comments. As always, with anything that is spoiler related, please indicate that there are spoilers in your comment before leaving the comment, so that people that are not looking for spoilers don't get spoiled. But yeah, those of you that are here to hear about how this connects to the rest of the manga, let's talk about that. So with the Shihakusho, we know that, I guess the implication, because I say that we know that, is it Hikafune? Geez, I'm trying to remember the royal guard lady that has all of the different, fabrics, right? That she makes the captain's cloaks and stuff, assumably. Um, that she gets like the new outfits made for Ichigo and Renji, and even assumably, boy Shunsui, right? So we know that like that can be something made individually for a person, and that maybe it's an invention similar to like how the Zanpakuto is an invention, but both of those are very kind of aligned with Soul Reaper powers. You have to wonder about that, like, and whenever I think about it, it's like, okay, well, of course Ichigo has the Shihakusho right now because he's just taking on Rukia's powers, but later on, whenever he's in his spirit body and he gets Shinigami powers again, we know that he's really kind of awakening Quincy powers more so than Shinigami ones, but why does he still have a Shihakusho then? And so, I'm curious exactly how intrinsic the Shihakusho is to the nature of like Soul Reaper powers, right? It's clearly like tied to it, but yeah, hard to tell. Interesting here that also Renji is like, who are you and what unit are you with? Which is kind of interesting. I just said it was interesting twice. I'll say it another time. It is real interesting. 13th Division is the one that has jurisdiction over Karakura, I'm pretty sure. So I wonder, if it would make maybe a little bit more sense for Renji to be like, oh, are you with the 13th or something like that? But it also makes sense for him to just ask what unit you're with, because clearly Byakuya and Renji were dispatched to come for Rukia. So maybe he's thinking that, Ichigo might be someone coming for Rukia as well. I love that he's freaking out over the size of the Zanpakuto. I know that we come to learn that, captains, especially like anyone at that like level of Ryatsu, knows how to kind of control their flow of their Ryatsu so much that they, otherwise they'd be running around with swords the size of skyscrapers, I believe is the line. So we know that, like, yes, this technically isn't an impressive feat, but it make for someone like Renji, I think it is, right? And I like that there is that disparity, that Byakuya isn't thrown for a loop by this because he knows that it's not really something to be impressed by, but Renji doesn't quite know how to take it, right? He's still sort of figuring this out. I love that he's like, oh, I thought it was big compared to Rukia's, because it literally is Rukia's sword. Now, people have constantly, they've asked before, like, if Ichigo was able to go into Shikai, would he have Rukia's Shikai? And I don't think that's the case, right? I think here, whenever he's using this in Pakto, yes, it's the same design as Rukia's. Yes, the Asahuchi's taken the, design of, God, I'm trying to remember Rukia's power. Something like, is it Hakano Togame? Whatever it is. Boy, that's one that's not going to come to me. But anyway, Rukia's Zanpakuto. I don't think Ichigo would be able to access her powers. I think it's just got that form, but it doesn't really have the same functionality. And should Ichigo start to like actually be able to speak to his inner sort of, I say his inner hollow, if he was able to actually speak to actual Zangetsu, um, the white, right, Shiro, then, or Shirosaki, however you want to refer to him. If he was able to speak to Zangetsu, then I think that he would awaken, that it would take the form of Zangetsu eventually. But the fact that he doesn't have that awareness, I think it keeps the kind of initial sort of impression that it had from the way that Rukia's spiritual power had molded it, because he's just using her powers. Yes, his Reiatsu is affecting them, and so that's why I have that interpretation, right? So, like, if he were to be able to communicate with Zangetsu, then I think his powers would continue to affect the look of this appropriately. But that's, I don't think he would be able to speak to Rukia's actual sword spirit or anything like that. Anyway, all speculation, but yeah, there are people that are like, what would he actually use Rukia's abilities? What's the deal there? Um, yeah, and like, you have to wonder, maybe a little bit, because he is borrowing her powers, right? Anyway, we do get this reiteration of the Zanpakuto being proportionate to the the Wilder spirit energy, or the Reiatsu. I think that is kind of cool. Again, really selling Ichigo as this powerful sort of character. It's interesting here that we do get that this is in miniature, and I wonder if I mentioned this in the previous episode, or if this was something that I talked about last time I recorded this, but the recording didn't kind of stick. So, ugh. But the idea that this is kind of the invasion arc revisited in a lot of ways, or not invasion arc, what am I saying? That it's the Rukia rescue arc revisited in a lot of ways, right? Um, in that we are kind of seeing, Ichigo coming to the rescue of Rukia, these Shinigami sort of being, you know, what is like really dismissive of Ichigo, looking down upon him, thinking it's like a death wish. Rukia being like, "You idiot, why'd you come?" All of that. So we get to revisit a lot of this through the next arc, which I think is interesting. And then I like that Ichigo's insistence upon that does have Renji then, of course, turn about too. I remember now it's Isode no Shirayuki, by the way. I'm trying to remember where I got that other name from. Maybe it's the name of one of her techniques. She has a bunch of different technique names. But yeah, Sode no Shirayuki is the name of her sword. I remember because it is particularly long. Sode no Ice Chick is the spirit, right? Anyway, so I think that is kind of neat that we have the structure of like Renji being the first one that Ichigo fights, and then Byakuya being the eventual sort of boss, and we get that here kind of in miniature, but with Ichigo losing. Of course, Kisuke is intentionally. I think Kisuke is intentionally sending Ichigo up against his opponents because he knows that Ichigo is going to be pretty wrecked, and maybe even. See, like, here's what I have to question, because Kisuke sends Ichigo up there. I think Kisuke could get involved himself to stop Rukia from getting captured, but then that would just escalate things further, right? And Kisuke is not supposed to get involved in all this whole society stuff, so maybe it makes sense that he's looking out for himself, even though he knows that it's really, really big problem that the Hogekyo end up in Aizen's hands, right? So I wonder if Kisuke is kind of just doing this knowing that Ichigo is going to lose, so that like Kisuke can cultivate Ichigo's own powers afterwards, because that's what it ends up being, right? So I can't help but get the sense that he's just kind of watching from the sidelines to see how things go, and that if Ichigo ever ends up in actual like moral or I guess mortal like actual peril, like if they're going to really kill him, then Kisuke would maybe intervene. But knowing Kisuke's powers, especially his Bankai, it's like, yeah, Kisuke would have been able to handle things even if Ichigo, I think, got killed, or were to be put within like inches of his life. Anyway, um, Khan throwing himself away is good stuff. Yeah, I love that the all of Renji's kind of tells as a fighter are this obvious this early on. Of course, that ends up getting brought up later for how Ichigo actually defeats Renji, right? That he realizes that Renji has to kind of draw back Zabimaru each time, and so he's able to find the openings there. This mention of like, whenever Ichigo dies, the power will go back to Rukia. I wonder if that's actually how that works. Because, you know, like, whenever Ichigo does have like is literally put like on death's door and has his powers kind of shunted from him. Rukia does eventually regain her powers. So I wonder if it's like she can't have them because she bequeathed them to Ichigo, and so long as he's using them, she is powerless. But the assumption, right, was that she would get her powers back over time. So, I wonder if it's just more that she got her powers back over time now that she wasn't in this Gigai that Urahara put her in. Whenever she returns to Soul Society. Not so much that Ichigo stopped using them. But yeah, I don't know. This is a weird line from Renji. I don't know how to really take it. I don't really like there's nothing to kind of show otherwise, but also I don't know, there's no reason for me to believe that that would be necessarily true either, right? There's nothing that proves it or disproves it. So I guess I have to just assume that it might be true. Um yeah, Ichigo interrupting somebody mid kind of monologue and antagonist in that way, especially with him like attacking their face. This is something that we'll see a ton throughout Bleach. Usually it's the face grab that he does, but Ichigo in a lot of ways, like I don't know, Kubo kind of has this structure of like the antagonist sort of handing Ichigo his ass or like really kind of approaching with a certain like really memorable line or something like that, and then Ichigo then giving that back to them either by returning the line like he does in this fight, or kind of interrupting them. A lot of Ichigo interrupting them with like I said, like an attack to the face, and this works doubly so as Renji's like, you couldn't even put a scratch on a real Soul Reaper, and he immediately slashes him in the face and puts a scratch on him. Anyway, it's good stuff, and it's consistent for Ichigo, and I love it. Yeah, Byakuya, of course, reiterating the important thing of this image from the secret mobile force. I assume that's Squad 2, right? But who knows? And if it is Squad 2, if the secret mobile force is meant to be Squad 2, the idea that it is not what it used to be because it's gone from being under jurisdiction of Yorichi Chihoen to Soifon. Boy, I couldn't tell you Soifon's full name. It's not coming to me. But Soifon, yeah, so I guess the idea is like, yeah, well, they would be less capable maybe under them, which Soifon is constantly kind of shown to be in a lot of ways kind of immature and really sort of learning things and not completely as up to snuff as Yorichi was. So I'd buy that too. Which is, if that is the case, if this is the secret mobile force or whatever is meant to be Squad 2, this is a pretty deep cut to kind of have that here present and then consistent throughout, because we really don't see Yorichi and Soifon having those sorts of interactions until real late into the Soul Society arc. Anyway, um, we do get, of course, the mention of the name. You can't even ask your Zanpakuto its name. Uh, this 2,000 years too early. I wouldn't read that too literally, but of course we do get his Shikai Zabimaru. Interesting here that it isn't named Shikai again. I think at this point I'm not even sure that Kubo has this two-tiered system of Shikai Bankai figured out himself yet. Um, just that these weapons have a name that you can call out their name and transform them. I think that's essentially the basis of it so far, right? And that follows. I can certainly see it like as being only that developed, but that's still pretty cool development. Whenever I talk about like building these sorts of structures for these fights, and having a power system that really works for those structures, I mean that we know that there is very clearly like this structure for releasing your weapon, right? For manifesting your powers. And so the expectation is that against whatever Shinigami you fight, and really against the Espada too, that they're going to have these sort of you're going to have to fight them until they release their Shikai, and that's going to be a moment in the battle. And that's going to change things in the battle and complicate it in some sort of way. There are people that will say like, "Oh man, it's total Deus Ex Machina. The character uses their power, and it just happens to be the right power." And it's like, well, yeah, the power is going to complicate the battle, and the character is going to be able to use it in a way that is cool or interesting or lets them win. Otherwise, like writing wise, why even and like have them involved in these sorts of fights? And I think there's plenty of fights where a character uses their Shikai and isn't just the ultimate answer to whatever their opponent is. So I don't know. I don't buy that criticism as much. Again, I think a lot of the fights in Bleach were maybe a little bit better than people give them credit, but we'll get there when we get there. You know, this first one between Ichigo and Renji is certainly fascinating, though, right? Renji doesn't have to release his sword, but I think this is really just a display of power on his part, right? He's really kind of trying to end the fight, especially with Ichigo being as unpredictable a foe as he is. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the "You'll die here" line particularly strikes because, of course, Ichigo comes as close as he has to dying here, and then I think not ever again until pretty much the until he actually dies in Hueco Mundo. I don't know. He comes pretty close a couple times in Soul Society, but always gets saved for one reason or another. Anyway, I like that. Of course, the idea is like he says that you'll die here, then we get that shot of Byakuya because Byakuya is of course the one to actually deliver that death blow, more or less. Whereas Renji, not so much, as we know the tides turn towards Ichigo, and he's able to kind of fend Renji off. But yeah, that's it for this chapter. I don't really have much else to say. Uh, is what it is. What it is. If you have any sorts of insights, anything that you want to talk about spoiler wise, again, make sure that you mark a comment as a spoiler. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this chapter and if you see any other connections that I might have glossed over or not even noticed myself. As always, this is Karakura Gold, reminding you that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.